Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed your breakfast. Sorry to interrupt the discussion, but we'll have much more. I'd now like to introduce our speakers. If I asked you to think of disruptive technology businesses, you would probably name brands like Uber, Airbnb, Snapchat, Instagram. Well, you can add one more name to that list, Nimble. Nimble was co-founded 12 years ago by Griffith Business School alumnus Greg Ellis. Nimble created a new category in the Australian lending space by using data and technology to provide smart loans for consumers. Greg's interest in small loans grew out of his own life experience. Fresh out of graduating with international business and commerce degrees, Greg found he was spending his money even before he'd earned it, and haven't we all been there? So something had to be done, and the seeds for growing Nimble were sown. The result is now one of Australia's most sophisticated fintech companies, and this morning Greg is going to share this remarkable story with us. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Evan Douglas, who's Professor of Entrepreneurship in the Griffith Business School. Evan has taught entrepreneurship, new venture strategy and business planning to MBA students in more than a dozen business schools in Australia, Canada, USA, England, China, India and Thailand. He's also coached MBA student teams to victories and top 3 finishes in the global business plan competitions that are held at the University of Texas, Austin. Evan's research includes entrepreneurial attitudes and abilities and new venture risk analysis, funding and strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please welcome Evan Douglas.
Well, welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming. Good to see some faces I recognise. Some of my former students obviously didn't get it the first time, but no. I know I'm the lead-up act for the big act, so you didn't come to hear me, right? It should work. It will, shortly. It does work. So it's entrepreneurship beyond the startup. Most of the entrepreneurship talk and literature and research and so on is before the startup. So we look at the entrepreneurial process and we say, well, it's all about coming up with a good idea. It's all about planning. This is when you bring out your business model canvas, you bring out your lean startup process as you work through. You decide, right, we're going ahead with this thing. And then you start marshalling the resources, drawing together what you need, particularly the funding, the human resources and so on. And then you get into the startup, the implementation of it. And that seems to be the end point of the study, that governments want to have people self-employed, start a business to employ people and so on. Beyond the startup, what happens after is relatively neglected, although there's a lot of research now happening on exit and failure and the grief that follows failure and so on. After the startup, perhaps the most probable outcome is that it will fail. Some 50% of businesses, new ventures, do fail. Some 90% of them disappear after a 5-8 year period. 90% of them you can't find their names anywhere, because about half of the people, or 40% of the total, have gone into a merger and acquisition or changed their name for some reason. And those may not be unhappy exits, but the initial firm has changed fairly substantially. So we do talk about it's better to fail fast. So you set up, if you're going to fail, fail quickly and fail as cheaply as possible. So it's a sort of precautionary thing. And the affordable loss principle says don't bet the farm. Don't bet the farm, because you'll lose the farm and then you don't have a second run at anything. But a better outcome would be to survive. Lots of firms survive and don't make a lot of money. But then lots of firms, lots of new ventures are not intended to make a lot of money. They're independence-oriented, lifestyle-oriented, make myself a job will do, thank you very much. We're more interested, probably everyone in the room has come here to talk about commercial entrepreneurship, where we're going to make lots of money over a long time and be very happy and rich at the end of it, right? So that's where we'll focus today, where I will focus at least, and I'm sure Greg's got a similar story, I'm guessing. Then after the startup, there's the exit and harvest questions, where the entrepreneur might exit the business and take some money, might exit the business on a plank. You never know. That's the failure story. But the entrepreneur could exit the business continues, goes to greater heights or lesser heights as it might be, or the business exits the industry, that is the name disappears into some sort of conglomerate, some other firm. And finally the entrepreneur can go round again. Lots and lots and lots of entrepreneurs become serial entrepreneurs where they start a new venture quite often, or quite generally, because they like the process. They enjoy this process of discovery and exploitation of new ideas and achieving what they can. So entrepreneurship, you all know about entrepreneurship, and one of the first things you should know is that it's risky business. It's risky financially because you can lay out your money and lose it. It's risky for physical and mental health reasons. People get sick, tired, crazy from when things don't go well because it's not going to be so easy. People lose their families, divorces are common. Well, perhaps they're common everywhere. And you might lose your reputation. That is, people be pointing the finger, oh, that's the guy who went broke. That's the guy who went broke twice. Sometimes investors look at that and say, well, there's a guy who's got some experience in this business. So it's risky, but it's also unpredictable. You don't know what the risks are. It's uncertainty, not just risk, but uncertainty, where you don't know what's coming along the road, what could sink your ship fairly quickly. Good news, no, the bad news continues. It's frustrating because you urgently want to do this, want to change things, want things to happen your way, and people jump up in front of you. Bureaucrats, bankers. Any bankers in the room? I'll keep my bank jokes to a minimum. So it's frustrating because you've got a kind of a expectation that this will work and it would work if people would just get out of your way. It can be very rewarding financially. You could make a lot of money. You could be like Google and go IPO that is. In IPO, that's a grocery store, I think, and still keep half the shares and still be in charge. It can be personally satisfying. Now that could be to be your own boss, to be more flexible in when you go to work, when you don't, and so on. Lots of small businesses say the most important to them is looking after their employees and their employees' families. Rewarding, they get satisfaction out of that. And of course, the social responsibility side. It might be social entrepreneurship in the first place, or commercial entrepreneurship with a social side. So that's what entrepreneurship like. Here's a picture of entrepreneurship. I think this is called Wipeout. And if you've ever seen this ridiculous program, this thing here rotates that way. These red things swivel around unexpectedly and knock you into the water. And you've got to try and complete this obstacle course. And it's a bit like entrepreneurship. Things pop up that knock you off your feet, knock you out of your seat and so on. But the fact is, it can work. It does work for people who are able and sometimes maybe lucky enough to do the right things at the right time, or respond well, or be resilient enough to come back in after they've been poked in the nose and have another go, probably after a bit of a pivot and run in a different direction, because if this direction's not working, it doesn't make sense to continue getting that poke in the eye. So why don't we start a new business? Let's think about starting a new business. It could be an incremental innovation where we enter a known product category with a differentiated product. Our product is incrementally different in some way. It could be simply the way it looks. So we could come out with, in the shoe business, we could have a different shoe. You know, a nice looking shoe. It still has toe box and a heel box and so on. It's a shoe, but it looks different. So we're competing on style or design or fashion, if you like. Or we could add function improvements. We could make the heel a little softer so it doesn't transmit shocks to your joints and so on. Or we could have function additions. Now, years ago we worked on ventilated shoes where the heel, compressing the heel, was acting like a pump to draw air out of your shoe, and it would suck in through the laces and you could ventilate your shoes, your feet, while running. So that would be an incremental innovation. That business didn't succeed, I want to tell you. Or we could talk about radical innovation. Radical innovation where it's a totally new product, a new product category, and it something like the Segway. The Segway competes with other forms of personal transportation, but it's in a class of its own. It was in 2002 when it launched. Now, some 15 years later, there's all sorts of hoverboards and everything else that have come in to do what they demonstrated was possible. Have a personal transportation mode that was fun as well as economical and easy to park. So, why don't we start a business? I'm thinking a fish and chip shop. Wow, that's entrepreneurial, isn't it? Huh? What's innovative about a fish and chip shop? Well, if it's a normal standard fish and chip shop, if you were just ordinary, you'd start at a disadvantage because nobody knows who you are, where you are, how good your chips are, and so on and so on. So you've got to have something innovative. I've got an idea. We're going to do fish milkshakes. Fish milkshakes, that's innovative. You've not contemplated that much before. Why are you grimacing? Who's grimacing? I see people grimacing. Fish milkshakes, look at the idea. Just check it out. It's very, very nutritious. Slimming, drink them, and you probably won't want to eat anything else. Tastes great, got every vitamin in there, and it's got the fantastic omega-3 fatty acids. You're going to live longer, have a better brain, etc., etc. This stuff is saleable, right? Now, I personally take a little fish oil tablet every now and again, and it doesn't have to taste like fish, does it? Doesn't have to smell like... Food scientists can do everything. But the name, fish milkshake, we've got to do something with that, right? So how are we going? Will we make money from this thing? First thing, will the market take it? This is the demand technology nexus. Will the market front up buy this product? Well, we've got to do some work on the product, probably. Will the market, we're talking about individual customers come and buy this thing, will they pay enough money, and enough of them pay enough money to make this viable? First test. Second test, do we have competent management? It could be a brilliant product, but we can muck it up badly and the business goes down the hill and it may be to never recover. So that's the second thing we need. The third thing we need is to be able to maintain this differentiation. We've basically got to stop other fish and chip shops from putting fish milkshakes into their product line. Now, that might be hard. How do we put barriers to entry to people imitating our fish milkshake? So this takes us to the resource-based theory, which says we can differentiate a product if we can control, sole control of a specific resource that's necessary for that product. And so that if a resource is valuable, rare, inimitable, which means it's both hard to copy and it can't be imitated or it's non-substitutable. So just you look out the window and you see glass has substituted concrete, totally different technology in buildings. Can we find a different technology to serve the customer in the same way? So it's something in our resource base has got to be valuable, rare and inimitable, and we call those strategic resources, right? What are they? Notice the red down the side, a little acronym there reads out to profit. That helps us remember what they are. Physical resources, reputational resources, organisational, financial, intellectual and technical. You can read that and see where they are. Now, somewhere in there we have to have valuable, rare, inimitable resources. Basically, we've got a must-have organisational capability, because if we can't manage a cat fight, then we can't run the business. We have to have that first, and then we need at least one of, the remainder. Now, physical resources are not going to be hard to copy. Great building on a great street and so on, across the road another one could be there. Reputation is hard to build, but it's hard to imitate. Financial is not hard to copy. If you're a good investment, the money will come from drugs or prostitution or piracy or somewhere to seek that higher return. Intellectual is hard to copy, and technical turns out to be not so hard to copy, not so hard to imitate, and we'll see why. Will be imitated over time. Will be imitated if we make profit, rivals will enter to make profit if they can. What stops them is this inimitability of strategic resources. So if they can't copy it, maybe they can invent around it. So these resources, not just your technology, come up with a different way to make your engine run more lean or more economically, but not just your technology, but your physical resources are building across the street from you. Develop equivalent reputations. You know, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, both have really good reputations. They both have an inimitable resource. Well, nearly inimitable. It's not identical, but we know what those brands mean to us. They build their organisation capability and their human resource team, and they establish their technical resources, trademarks, designs, etc. So if I have a monopoly initially with a lawnmower, engine by Honda, Owen there sets up engine by Kawasaki, and he's got the same brand leverage that I had, except a different brand, but equally perceived well. The only solution is relentless innovation. You've got to do it again. Your entrepreneurial behaviour, which is proactive, risk-taking innovation, has got to become a habit. It's not a one-trick pony. That pony got to learn new tricks to go round again. Imitation. Can anyone see which is the real Elvis? Which end? This end? This guy? No. Is it the guy in the middle, the Asian version? Is it the guy on the left? Who thinks it's the guy on the left? Who thinks it's none of them? And you're right. These are imitators, right? Now, what's that got to do with what I'm saying here? Elvis was not competing with these guys. They came along later. But with his contemporaries, he was continually innovating in music, in dance and songs, outfits, movies, and so on. And indeed, points out that entrepreneurship is a part of any singing, dancing, and so on. Roy Orbison, some of you will remember Roy Orbison, put strings behind the rock and roll. Madonna and Lady Gaga and etc. The one the kids made, I've forgotten the name. The kids are big about that woman filled the stadium recently, but we'll go on. What's her name? Adele, yes. Right. So what the new venture needs, in addition, once they're up and running and profitable, and they've got to continue this innovation, we step now from entrepreneurship into the field of strategy, and strategy says you need to develop absorptive capacity, which is the ability of your top management team to learn things, write them down, codify them, and teach them to others so that it's not then dependent on who's in the building and who's not. They also need to get dynamic capability. That's that organizational capability built into the ability to change, to go with the flow, preferably going ahead of the flow, or at least adjacent to it. In summary, it's risky business, right? You don't know much about initially where your costs and revenues are going to come from and how big they'll be, and you're subject to these unexpected events. You should have some sort of innovative advantage at the beginning that gives you a first mover advantage, and your problem is to turn that into a sustainable competitive advantage. And you'll do that if you control some inimitable resources. You then need to continue entrepreneurialism, if you like. It doesn't stop with launching. It's got to be continual, or you'll fade out over time, like in any long race, like a marathon. If you start to puff and pant, someone else pound behind you is going to come past you. Build your product lines and your dynamic capability and absorptive capacity. So it's that simple, okay? Next, let me introduce Greg. Greg Ellis from Nimble is now going to tell you in practice what the professor said would work in theory.
Morning, everybody. So today's about the entrepreneurial mindset, and it's probably a good time for me to discuss it because I parted ways with Nimble on February the 3rd, and so having spent a few months surfing and not doing too much, I'm starting to have a little bit of a sniff around it, whatever the next thing's going to be. As Evan said, ready to start, building and creating something new. Not quite ready, probably in about 3 or 4 months, probably by the end of the year. I think it's a trick is not to just wander off into whatever comes up next, but to, actually pause, because in my case it's 16 years with 2 startups, the last 16 years, with just a 9-month gap in between. Having said that, I didn't kill myself the last 2 or 3 years, so I'm reasonably fresh. But at the same time, I think it's good to just, be sort of almost more disciplined to actually not do something for a little while. Having said that, I'm on sort of what's called gardening leave at the moment, so my brain's in second gear. So, I may not be at my sharpest today, but I'll do my best. So I'm really just trying to go fallow, I suppose, for what would be Act 3. So what I'm going to do is, to try to elicit the entrepreneurial mindset, I'll just discuss sort of that, embryonic stage of the 2 startups that I've been in, and hopefully they'll give you sort of a practical idea of what, how it actually works at the get-go. So I'm definitely feeling it at the moment as far as actually thinking, like I'm starting to look at a few opportunities myself at the moment, and I couldn't even tell you what it's going to be. So the first thing I did, what was it? With the same business partner, 2 of us did 2 businesses in a row. He's an Irish guy called Shane, and we sort of complement each other pretty well. So, we shared some things in common when I was working over in Ireland, and we didn't want to have a job, and it was sort of creative guys in a way. So, through these stories, probably you'll sort of figure out what it is and what it is not, the entrepreneurial mindset, because a lot of sort of stereotypes get thrown around, they're not quite on the money. So, my brother's girlfriend was an occupational therapist, and she said, okay, Ireland's growing fast and it needs health people. And so it wasn't our idea at all, this not by any stretch. So we're sort of adventurous guys, so Shane quit his job and we just started a recruitment agency, and we didn't know anything about health or recruitment, and we didn't know anything about the internet, but we did it anyway. And so what happened is, a year later we hadn't even made 1 cent of revenue, and we're like, oh, what are we going to do now? And then there was, this was over in Ireland, and all the hospitals in Ireland took some contract with one British recruiter. And we were like, whoa, okay. It was like an arrangement that the government had, so, we were out. And then Shane's mum was a pharmacist. She's like, oh, why don't you do community pharmacy? Like, they're building suburbs, and every suburb's got to have a pharmacy in it. So even pivoting out of our originally out of an idea that wasn't even ours anyway, even the pivot wasn't our idea, that was Shane's mum. So then we, I think what we did then is they deregulated pharmacy in Ireland, and this is kind of when Ireland was growing very fast. It was 2001 or 2 or something. And so what we did, we had no interest actually in the what we were doing at all, but we just jumped on the phones and we made relationships with pharmacy bodies in Australia and New Zealand, because you had to be educated either there or in Ireland, and we just grinded it out. So if there were 3 of us living in a little house, there was another mate of mine who's Australian, he's a physio, and we just were on the road around Ireland, and we sort of learned a lot about software development and the initial stages of online marketing. And if you made 10 grand a pop, because the salaries were quite high, and you got 10% of €100,000 and you play 6 a month, and there were 3 of you with no expenses, like, that was okay. So we got to that stage after a while, and then we were like, we're not really interested in this at all, actually. Like, we don't actually care about pharmacists getting jobs and all the employers, having pharmacists in the shop. It was just an opportunity, and we were in survival mode, and we exploited it, and we just sort of explored and wandered and accidentally found ourselves, in that position. So it's not necessarily some amazing epiphany, and then, you have some business plan and you follow through this sort of process. It can be pretty, like that wipeout game up there. It can be pretty ugly and accidental sometimes. So, there was a combination of luck, but I think probably the takeaways for us out of that was we developed good discipline, and we were just very patient and extremely persistent, and as I said, online marketing and software development, like we weren't coders or anything, but we sort of started to understand our way around it. We didn't know anything about those things beforehand, so I think don't be discouraged if you have no specific knowledge of a particular area. Like, you look at someone like Richard Branson, obviously just jumps into these things, and it's probably more from a customer's point of view, which is probably almost more powerful sometimes. So, as I said, we didn't care about it. It was sort of a bit of dumb luck, opportunism, but probably some of the positive traits that we have still, in spite of all that, enabled us to just grind and grit and push through it. So it's a pretty unsexy, unromantic sort of story, that first one. Hence, we're not in it. But that was a 3-year exercise, and we just didn't sell it for that much, like maybe 500 or 600 grand between 3 of us. But that was all right for a couple of, guys in our late 20s. At the time, we thought that was amazing. So we're on to Act 2, which started in 2005. So, probably learned a fair bit from that first sort of teeth-cutting exercise there, and we started Nimble. But again, it was a pretty, weird, ugly sort of beginning, and it's not some beautiful fairy tale-like thing. I think a lot of people know that we were mowing lawns just to make $400 a week pocket money, just so we could, live, because we took all that other money and just put it all into this. But the way it played out is really, we were talking about, using people's incoming salary as security, and we were up in Paddington just playing pool. Shane was just over in Australia, just on holiday really, and we bought a pool table and we had it in one of these, those raised Queenslanders where you've got like just a slab underneath, and we had a pool table and toilet under there, and we're just wasting our days away. We were very much in the same mode about a month ago, actually, because he's only on the board of Nimble now, and he was over here, and we were just sitting around at the cafe, just musing, which is often where the good stuff starts, I think. So, we talked about short-term loans and, annoying our mothers and asking them for money all the time and, not paying it back. And then suddenly, you owe her a few grand. Still don't really know if I've paid that back. And probably a lot of people can relate to that. And also, we both had credit card entanglements as well. You just keep going boop, 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 and suddenly it's a bit onerous. And, then there's sort of less savoury options like, pawnbrokers and stuff. We think we're the first people in the world to think of this, and sure enough, it's everywhere. But so it sort of was in Australia, but really we still weren't, I wouldn't say I was in love with it at the start. We actually bought a franchise off these guys. And then just because we thought, we'll have a bit of passive income and then we'll figure out what we really want to do, And then we're like, these guys are like retarded, this is ridiculous. So what we did is we basically, the franchisor hadn't disclosed something. We more or less legally wriggled out of it, and it was really painful. We're really lucky to get our franchise fee back, and then we just thought we can do this way better. We've just had an online business, and then we started up in Southport, but we still had a shop for a little while actually, because it does take a while to learn some things, and then bit by bit the pennies started dropping. It's not like on day one we were like, we're going to use the first letter of people's Christian name, decide whether it's capitalised and whether that's going to be a feature that's going to help predict credit worthiness and that sort of stuff. Like, no way, that all these things, it's just a step on a step on a step on a step. You don't even know what step 99 is on day one, So I hope this isn't sort of disappointing in as much as it's explaining a non-binary sort of process, which in some ways can be discouraging, but I also think it's inspiring in a way, because it's like, if these guys can do it and you just hang in there and you actually adapt, you can do it. So, so then the layers sort of came, we stopped doing phone calls out, and then, we got rid of paper, and then we had the fastest payment because we had a guy on a skateboard going around Southport manually paying people. Sort of, it's doing the things that other people aren't prepared to do. So there's a 21-year-old kid with like 90 grand on him, and all the banks are in Southport and they're close together, and he just goes and he queues up, and then he goes back to gets another bunch of money, and he's doing that a few times a day. So, and that happened for many years, actually. This isn't a one month, that's Kerry, and he's a legend, actually. and then we started to tweak to this technology stuff, and then we're like, okay, well, you can get a loan in a few seconds, and then, we were able to apply that successfully, and then, we were the first guys sort of anywhere actually to be able to do it on mobile. Like we went over to New York and met with these pimple-faced 21-year-old kids who made this amazing app, and then, we always wanted to work with the best people, and on the brand we sort of had, the guys who did the Facebook logo did the Nimble identity as well. So we started to build on what we'd learned in the first business with packaging, marketing, and using the very best technology and the best people we could, not shying away from that. So then after all that, we're like, gee, we're actually like one of 3 or 4 sort of companies in the world who can do this, and we wouldn't have predicted that on day one. It just all started out of such modest sort of beginnings, I suppose. But I guess we were ambitious. So I suppose the takeaways from Act 2 is that it existed, but we made it a lot better, because we saw that in several respects it was a poor experience. We probably got very good at the sort of brand and identity and culture creation as well behind that, and in actually building a team culture, because that's something we hadn't done the first time round, and it was sort of out of our identities and the way we sort of operate. We sort of wanted everything to behave that way. I think the other thing is staying abreast of trends and what's the latest data and device usage, and how people are digesting content and media, and how are they best contactable and that sort of thing. So I'll probably talk about that a little bit. And then there's corporate governance and how to finance a significantly bigger business, I suppose. So the other things sort of we took out of Nimble. I guess the recurring themes were that we knew nothing about either of those 2 industries. We're just like, loans suck, it should be better. Okay, let's give it a go. And we sort of wandered and sort of explored and sniffed our way into it, And we learned from prior experience, and we're both probably very strong on execution, I think, we sort of questioned everything. We're always like, why does this have to be like this? We probably by nature have sort of a disruptive, recalcitrant, don't like authority, don't like the way things are done. And I think that's a strong thing for sort of an entrepreneur to have in your sort of personality profile. I think you almost look at things and it pisses you off because of, you just see something that could just be so much better. And maybe even the way business is, you don't even like how traditional business runs. You're like, well, why does it have to work like this? Why do we have to have board meetings at all these times and all that? I mean, some of that stuff's as defined by law, but sometimes you think there could be a different way entirely of running a business. So probably just away from the two businesses, just before I finish. How are we going for time, actually? I've got no idea. Oh, yeah? All right, cool. So, I mean, it just probably highlights, in my experience anyway, that the idea is probably just 5%, and I think you want to explore and wander and, create, and then you start to sort of get the butterflies a bit. I don't know if you get them on day one. I certainly didn't with either of my 2 undertakings. And I wouldn't be discouraged if things have been done before. As I said, like, Elon Musk, probably not the first dude to think of going to Mars or having rocket ships and electric cars, but it's probably more, he was just like, well, why isn't this being done, and proving that it can, because I think it's good if you have that contrarian sort of personality, because you don't really care what other people think, because people are going to be sort of like, yeah, but, and you're just like, and you just do it, you just do it. You almost use that as fuel to actually, execute. So I think, as Evan sort of said there, that often successful business is sort of a derivation of other things that exist. So, who else is missing the point? In what way is something, a bit lame and crap, or a crappy customer experience, that sort of stuff. I'm reading a good book at the moment that a friend put me onto. called Hits, and it talks about when you create something, it's a blend of novelty and familiarity, and it goes back to everything from like that lullaby song that people, still sing to their babies 400 years later, and it looks at things like Instagram and 50 Shades of Grey, etc., and trying to actually understand why they are hits, and trying to, it overthrows sort of a virality myth as well. But it's a very interesting book. I'd suggest it's by a bloke called Derek Thompson. But in that, sometimes people can get too fussy when they create something. They want to, let's have 50 million features, and things get too heavy. But you have to actually, if you look at something like Instagram, which is pretty interesting, there was lots of photo sharing apps kicking around at the time, but it was just, all right, what's really simple, elegant, strip out all the crap features, and what are the main ones? We're going to focus on those. And that's only half the story, because then you have to have the distribution aspect, because, they're lucky enough that the dude who founded Twitter actually tweeted a screenshot of that before it was launched, and he had a massive following. So the combination of the product resonating, sort of meeting people where they are, not inventing some ridiculously intellectual thing that people just aren't going to take up. I think you have to be mindful of what are people's habits at the moment, and where do they want to get. So we can give them a little bit of novelty, but not another word going through my head there at the moment. I shouldn't say that, but not fry their brains, I suppose, because then they just don't want to do it. So and a lot of that is it's the idea, and it's the timing, and it's also the distribution, and also even things like the fact that people don't read anymore and they don't pick up the phone, and emails kind of dying, and even those sort of things. There's opportunities within that. So I'm probably just trying to give a clue to some of the little catalysts and areas within which you can explore. So I'll just quickly cover off sort of what is and isn't important. I don't think making money is super important. I think it sort of clouds, obviously it has to be managed, and you have a runway, and there's realities, and you need, a certain number of people to execute what you're doing. But, saying you're going to make a lot of money isn't going to get the best talent, and it's not really going to make it that interesting. It's not going to get you out of bed. It sort of clouds priorities of anything. You want to be like, when you're like 4 years old and you're in the sand pit just with trucks, you're basically building cool shit with your mates. And I don't see it as that much different to that. And I think if it starts to get away from that too much, you're probably on the wrong track. I see it as it's probably that simple when you really distill it down. It's not so much being opportunistic. It's more sort of solving a problem and creating something. I don't think you want to get too hung up on the whole startup scene where everybody's kicking around, talking around, oh yeah, we raised this much, and yeah, all right, but well, what have you done with that? There's just a bit of vanity. Like really, like it's not super sexy. Like we were mowing lawns, and we're like doing collections, phone calls, and there's all this unglamorous stuff, and that's just part of it. So that's just what it is, doing the stuff. Probably what is important, just to finish, is I think having that real affinity and empathy, with the customer, and also being a dissatisfied sort of person who has a vision of sort of how things should be. If you want to really change customer behaviour and do something radical, and I think this is probably something, over the last few years, maybe Nimble definitely could have done better. I think it was a bit hard to work out, all right, what are we going to do next? What's the innovation and that sort of thing? So as something gets a bit bigger, that can be tricky too. Because you need to keep innovating even when things are going well. Otherwise, you're resting on your laurels, and especially in tech, you're just going to get your ass kicked. I think from a personality perspective, I talked about being contrarian and an independent thinker, because I think the very biggest hits are when, you think, like that Big Short movie example, everybody's just, it's those fringe outlier guys who know their stuff and are confident in the face of a lot of opposition, who end up doing very well. Obviously, I think just being action oriented, not talking, and just very driven and confident and ballsy. that's probably another thing. Probably from a cultural point of view, I think it's good if you can tell a story behind what you're doing. It's like, oh, we're doing this because of this, and and you're able to rally and get people excited about it in a very authentic way with no angle or anything. The other ways might work, but that's not my style. You can probably tell I'm pretty unfiltered, I guess. So yeah, that's probably about it. And probably just to actually really care about what you're doing is like when I look at the two businesses, and I look at the first one where I just sort of, it was a sterile clinical sort of thing compared to the success with when you actually have passion for something, like it's just chalk and cheese. So that's it. Yeah, thanks a lot.
And I think we can see the connection there with the theory and what happens in practice. It certainly resonated with me. I've decided I'm not going to lend my kids money anymore. I'm going to send them to Nimble. And I was particularly interested, not surprisingly, in the franchising connection, that it was the franchise that sort of gave you that inspiration for your innovation. So well done. Now, I'm sure everyone would like to hear more. So what we're going to do now is have a Q&A session and take questions from the floor. We have a roving mic, so please wait until the microphone comes to your table so that everyone can hear. And I might just kick off with the first question, and that is that entrepreneurship, is it something that realistically everyone can aspire to, or are some people just not cut out to be entrepreneurs? Either one of you can have a go.
we may or may not disagree. I don't reckon we will on this one. That's all right.
I think the answer is definitely that some people wouldn't be happy to be entrepreneurs, and you've only got one life to live and you need to try and keep yourself happy over that life, and the stress and the uncertainty and ambiguity and so on of entrepreneurship is not the cup of tea of a lot of people. But that, of course, leaves plenty of room for those who are.
Yeah, I'd agree that not everybody's cut out for it. Everybody's blessed with a bunch of fine talents, and entrepreneurialism is just one way to live your life, I suppose, and it's just not for everybody, and it's just not fun sometimes. A lot of people probably very, very uncomfortable with the risk and having a lot of balls in the air at once and that sort of thing, and if it's going to damage your health and you can't sleep at night, and you're not kind of up for it, and you're not necessarily a creative type, then just do something else. Yeah. I probably was fairly detailed in the sort of profile that I think someone should have. So yeah, you need to just be honest with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, find your own strengths. Excellent. All right, so let's start taking some questions. We've got one over here. Thank you.
Just in regards to recruitment on the Gold Coast, particularly technology recruits, where did you recruit the guys who made the biggest difference to the company? And if they were overseas or interstate, what was the pitch to get them over here to the Gold Coast?
Yeah, we were really lucky at the start because marketing, legal, sort of a project guy, and another product/tech guy, which is the nucleus of the original team, were all on the coast. And then our first proper CTO, I suppose, was from Brisbane, and he recruited a lot of the tech people were Brisbane, northern New South Wales, so they'd meet up a little bit, but they weren't in the office that much. I probably think it would have been better if they're in the office a little bit more. But we got the stuff done, so it worked. There are a couple of guys from interstate over time that came. So it's just, the Gold Coast is a great place to live, and we're trying to we're sort of pissed off at how loans work, and we want to actually radically change that and have a technology company that's doing things a bit more differently and sort of fairly and transparently, and using all the latest data, and that was sort of the pitch to get people in. Yeah.
Thank you. There's another one at the same table. Yeah.
Hi, it's a bit of a personal question. Well, not really a personal question, but my business partner works in the UK and the US, so we've expanded the business basically. He's my friend. We've been in business for probably 4 years. We have never had an issue. We're all good. But I guess you never get into business with friends, that kind of thing. It's the old adage. What did you do to make sure that didn't happen? Especially in the growth phase, because obviously, we're getting profits coming from the Australian business to over there to start up the business, and it's not getting strained, but I can just see that as we're getting pulled apart and we don't get to spend as much time together, talk as much, it's just creating that little bit more of an issue.
Yeah, no, I think that old adage is just crap, I reckon it's great. But your friends, they need to be super talented. Like, I was lucky, I just managed to meet, right when we started the business, one of the most talented marketing guys in Australia, and that was just a fluke. And I was also, he's one of my best friends. Shane, I was friends with him when we started, and we're sort of both entrepreneurs, I suppose. So it's not a specific skill set. And then over time, because we culturally, we sort of carved out what we do and don't want with people. So they need to have the skill set, but they also need to fit in well with us. And that worked over time. And then some of those people that came on board, the first 10 or so sort of people have become some of my best friends, and they still are now. And even though I'm not in Nimble, we see each other all the time. So there was that. I think even though Shane and I were both mowing lawns and sharing a crappy little flat, every single night or morning, and we did this in a very, very disciplined way. It was like, what are you doing tomorrow? I'm doing this. Okay. So it'd be we'd always have the tactical and the strategic super transparently covered off at all times. So there was never any, he's not pulling weight, and we didn't get hung up on hours time spent in the office as well, because that was another thing we did in the first business. We had 3 of us, and we were always having stupid competitions to work the longest in the office. So it was more just like, what are you doing? And we both knew that we both were looking at the exact same point on the horizon. So if you're in sync there, and then you're in sync on the day-to-day, and it only is, you could exchange one 6-bullet point email every single day and just do it, even if you're not getting the chance to talk and you've got weird time zones, but just actually really, really do it, maybe at least weekly, it's just making sure you fill that gap. And I think rule number 2, was no festering issues. If there's even the tiny embryo of getting pissed off, straight out with it. Don't, because then it goes, and then you've got a problem. Yeah, simple, but things that I really, really believe in, yeah.
Is that typical, Evan, that
I
potential
think
for conflict?
it's an environment where conflict's inevitable, because you're under stress, you're under pressure. If you've got 2 people, you'll have at least 2 or maybe 3 opinions on any issue. So you've got to have, I advocate a conflict plan, that first conflict avoidance and then conflict resolution. And if, for example, I say that if you can't reach an agreement within 5 working days, then you flip it to Price Waterhouse partner who comes over and reconciles or arbitrates. I just mentioned Price Waterhouse, you know what I mean, any one of the law firms or accounting firms, someone who could listen and decide that in the best interest of the company you should be going like this. I advocate. But it's going to happen, and I do think you've got to like and respect the people you work with, or else the probability of conflict will escalate.
Well said. We've had all the questions off that table. We might just move down here and we'll come back to you. Thank you.
Greg, did you have any ethical dilemmas in setting it up, and the process of lending money and interest rates and how that would work, all of that sort of thing?
Yeah, no, not at all. Because, we looked at other lending where people borrow $500 and it turns into like $5,000, and we knew that's not what we want to happen for the customer. We don't want ugly collections practices and all that. So at the outset, the technology behind the underwriting and make sure that, you know, people are working and they can afford to repay. But then secondly, you know, that the charges, even if they actually blatantly don't want to pay, freeze at a certain point so it doesn't blow out to be a big problem. And then it's only a small loan to start with. And then, you know, mathematically, you know, if you take a normal commercial personal loan like you get from a bank, like 12% unsecured, and that's like, so what's that, 1% a month? And then if it's $500 loan, you know, that's about $5 a month. But the average loan, you know, until recently when we did bigger loans was about 3 weeks. So you're only making like $3 or $4 a month off a $500 loan if you're charging, if the loan's only 3 weeks and $500. And, you know, that's not tenable. So just the economics of the product is that if you do extend it as an APR, that it's, you know, it looks like it's eye-wateringly high, but in fact that's, you need to make a lot more than $3 off every loan in order to be able to, you know, market, pay, you know, or pay people. You've got tech guys, all that stuff. So that's just, so yeah, no, not at all. I'm just totally fine with the way we're doing it and what the charges are. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sabrina, and I just participated last week to another startup session, and this young entrepreneur, he has 5 companies, and he was sharing his experience and giving some advices, and one advice that you know, that I remember and that I'm concerned about, he said, don't hire people, you know, for long term. Just hire them as a casual for the task that you need. I'm about to start a social entrepreneur program, so I'm more concerned about, you know, the social stability, especially of, you know, local, small, medium businesses. So do you, which criteria do you use when you employ people? Do you employ them just for a task or to build together a project?
You know, we wanted people to join the family. Yeah.
Because, yeah, I'm from Europe, and we are very concerned in Europe with the working poor class, which, you know, as you said before, maybe not everyone can be an entrepreneur, and people have maybe 4 jobs, and they still, you know, have hard times. So it was very touched by the fact that such a young person of my generation was aiming in that direction. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, we really tried to get people excited about what we were doing, but also being part of the team. And we didn't want even someone for contracts or 6 months, because then it's, once they are part of that culture and you're sort of doing something with 2, 3, 4, 5 year horizon, and then you're flicking someone different every 3 to 6 months, you know, I don't know. Yeah, I always wanted people long term myself, and I think that more or less worked. Yeah, because we didn't really have sort of a big turnover of our main management team, really. It was pretty good, yeah. And then if someone left, you're actually sad because you like loved them like a brother and you had each other's back and everything. And that's sort of the environment you want, you know, I think. Not that corporate cutthroat, looking over the shoulder type, like that was just not for us, you know, yeah.
I think there's also the generalist versus specialist issue. You probably prefer to have a lot of good generalists than one excellent specialist. If you could alternatively outsource that speciality, because if that specialisation sort of fades out of significance, that person is not much good to you. So that if you have generalists who are good at a lot of things, then we're going to be more flexible, or more able to step to one side and go in a different direction, whereas a specialist might keep banging on about the finance or the something about it. So that in your family of team members, it's a very corporate thing to have specialist marketers, specialist finance, specialist HR, but in new and small business, I think you've got to think someone with a broader stance across those disciplinary fields and the ability to integrate them when you're selecting in the first place.
Okay. Another question? Yes.
Hi, my question is around the ecosystem and the future of work. following on from the last conversation, and the players inside of that ecosystem, and perhaps some thoughts around how the startup ecosystem, universities, actual small businesses and entrepreneurs, high growth firms can interplay to create a better ecosystem in this region?
Yeah, because probably we had stayed in our little box up the Gold Coast a fair bit, and probably hadn't networked out that much. And it's probably more recently, as I was saying to someone earlier, that we were probably wanting to interact a bit more with the university, with Griffith actually, and especially because we're only 3K down the road. That was probably to the end of, testing product development and then having talent coming out of the university and that sort of stuff, and probably somebody getting a different, an additional layer beyond what they get at university, I suppose. Probably funding in the area, I probably couldn't even talk to that at all, because we sort of, I guess the couple of guys that were on our board were from Melbourne, so that was sort of where our initial funding base came from. But it definitely, I don't know, they can kind of tie up a bit more actually. You're probably right. Like, I'm not aware of it all being nicely integrated. So where do you have, business guys that have a bit of experience, then you've got, up and coming guys, and then you've got funders, and yeah, I don't know, but I wish it was a bit more put together as well, I guess. I don't. What is the sort of? Is there some sort of peak body or anything at all that's even starting to make noise in that way, like in Queensland, or like just?
Queensland's Chief Entrepreneurship Office is doing that.
Oh yeah.
And if you look at the ecosystem, and there are multiple definitions of ecosystem, but I'm from the city, Brisbane City Council, and we look after the entrepreneurship to encourage people to come into the board. But how do we look at the ecosystem? It's the nucleus layer, which is, if you look at physics, take the definition from physics. Nucleus is where all the founders are, right? And then the parameters where universities, supporters, investors are. And then you have entrepreneurs who have made their business, scaled their business. They're coming back and investing back in the nucleus layer. So you have to have that sort of understanding, what is your role and where and how you're helping the entrepreneurs. So the founders are working hard, and supporters and the entrepreneurs who have made their billions, they should come back to the ecosystem. That's how we channel it, to giving back to the founders who are just starting at the moment.
Yeah. No, that's, and a lot of the successful, companies have, I suppose Facebook is one, even where they've seeded something at campus level to try to understand whether it works, and that's created a little sort of microcosm from which then it can take off from there, and that's one way to do it. That's sort of the way I was thinking about it. Yeah.
Do you have a view on that, Evan?
Well, it's the ecosystem is made up of lots of different bodies with essentially their own incentive structure. And I went to the city's. The city put on an evening the other night at Newstead Brewery, so I had two reasons to go. And that was, the city was telling all the entrepreneurs present how they can help them, how they can get rid of paperwork and so on. And then you go to a incubator, for example, and you've got venture capitalists or angels or whatever with their incentives to try and find. You've got entrepreneurs there. There's a lot of, to my mind, it's a fragmented infrastructure, and it's like a constellation of things, not a unified place to go. And maybe it shouldn't be a unified place, because it would probably take on too strongly the character of whoever is promoting that unified place. I'm not sure it's working as well as it can yet, but in the last couple of years in Brisbane, it's really come along.
Probably the only thing I'd add to that is that I know, Johan, he's another guy who was right at the start at Nimble as well, and he studied at Griffith, and we met a couple of months ago. Yeah, and he and I are probably pretty passionate about helping to feed what needs to be fed into what the syllabus should be as well. having gone through the works. It's like, well, what do you wish you knew that, you know, may or may not be there now? I think that's another aspect of it. Yeah.
Okay, and one very quick question to end. Thank you.
Hey, Greg, great speech. I actually run the
Thanks.
Entrepreneurs Club at Griffith Uni. And
Sorry?
I run the Entrepreneurs Club
Oh, yeah.
at Griffith
Yeah.
University. So we're trying to develop something around that. I'd love to speak to you after if
No
you or
problem.
any of the founders are interested in playing a part.
Yeah. I just got to be at Paddington at 10, so I'm cool for a while. It's only 8:45 or something, so yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
Yes, unfortunately we are out of time, so I want to thank both our speakers. Evan, thanks very much for sharing your extensive knowledge from many years of studying and researching entrepreneurship. And Greg, especially for being very frank with your story, and we discovered, of course, that you were an accidental entrepreneur, virtually. So that was fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you also for your thoughtful questions. It's been a very interesting discussion. Please keep in touch with the Griffith Business School through our Facebook page and LinkedIn and our e-news. And it'd be lovely to see you at our next event. Could you please thank our speakers?
Good job.